To him is Soo-Young Kim, a reporter at the Korea Times. Our center's co-directors are here. Jahangir Khattak is circulating, and Karen Pinar is here in the front row as well. The Newsmakers series is an on-the-record conversation between city leaders and the city's community and ethnic media, which serve as a bridge between mainstream society and immigrant communities and communities of color. This is one of many programs offered by the Center for Community and Ethnic Media, which provides professional development, research, and overall leadership for our city's community and ethnic media. You can find out more about it at ccem.journalism.cuny.edu. I'm very pleased to welcome today's newsmaker, Mira Joshi, TLC Commissioner. She has served in city government for more than a decade. Most recently, she was the Deputy Commissioner of Legal Affairs and General Counsel for the Taxi and Limousine Commission, where she was one of the principal architects of the settlement with disability advocates that will result in a 50% wheelchair-accessible taxi fleet by the year 2020. And we'll be getting an update on that, I'm sure. She also served as the first Deputy Executive Director of the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, an agency that's been very much in the news that investigates complaints of police misconduct. And she also served as an Inspector General for the New York City Department of Investigation. The agencies that she looked at and investigated alleged criminality and corruption included the Departments of Correction, Probation, Juvenile Justice, and the TLC. And we thank her for joining us this afternoon. Now, the format of the discussion will be as follows. We're going to ask the commissioner to spend about 5 minutes making some opening remarks about one or more current initiatives in her office. And then Abu and Soo-Young and I will ask some questions. While all of that is going on, Jahangir will be circulating and collecting index cards with your questions, and we're going to get in some of those as well. And at the conclusion of the event, the commissioner will step outside the room for any news organizations that need any quick follow-ups or to take photos and so forth. The rest of us will remain here for a very quick meeting. And with all of that said, let's begin. Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I'm really excited to be here. Working with the ethnic press is a big part of what our press office has to do in order to be effective in telling the regulatory, the people that we regulate what we're doing. So it's exciting to have this kind of a forum where we can share more freely with you what we're doing, as well as be open to answering questions. Just want to step back really quick to give two background things. Since this is the ethnic press, people often wonder, what are you? My name is Mira Joshi. That's an Indian name. My father's from India, but my mother's from England, so I'm the perfect American. I'm both of those things, and I was born and raised in Philadelphia. So I feel extremely lucky. And what do we do at the TLC? We license over 150,000 drivers now. That's about 90,000. They drive about 90,000 vehicles, transporting about 1 million people a day. And just a fact that often astounds people, a taxi usually puts on about 70,000 miles a year. So that's a lot of people, a lot of cars, and a lot of miles under us. And what we've been focused on recently have been what I like to call the fundamentals. So the competition of so many different new ways of providing service and the challenges across the country questioning whether we should regulate this service at all have been a real, quite frankly, a good thing for us, because they make us look at our rules and make sure that our rules are really only regulating those things that are fundamentals and that the market can do what it needs to do on the rest. So in terms of fundamentals, driver training. We've extended driver training so that it started in December and it'll be going on this year. We give core training on safety, customer service, and rules in multiple languages: Urdu, Bangladesh, Spanish, English, and we're going to add additional languages for all of our drivers now. We concentrate on other Vision Zero initiatives such as fatigue driving. I think that's been in the press a little bit. How much are drivers driving now that there's lots of drivers on the road and it's harder and harder to make a living? When's enough enough? Now our old rules just penalized taxi drivers, and it was a rule that was sort of inartfully crafted for today's world to enforce. It's almost impossible. And we need to look forward and see what our best practices and what is the data showing us on what average hours that drivers put in, and where should we sort of make a cutoff. And talking about data, we've done a lot last year on collecting data. We're the only for-hire regulator in the nation, and maybe even the world, that has the amount of information on trips that we have. We have it not only on our yellow and green taxis, but last year we began getting it for the Ubers and the Lyfts and the Gets and the Vias, and that has been a tremendous undertaking. My staff is very tired because it's a lot of information coming in that needs to be cleaned up and then put out in a form that the public can absorb it and that we can absorb it. But it's been a little clunky, so one of our initiatives for this year is to look at how we can streamline that, and how we can make sure that the actual market movement of the for-hire industry is as transparent as it can possibly be. And one thing I find kind of ironic is those that pushed against us getting this data in the beginning are now foiling us, or FOIL, you're all reporters. I don't have to explain that one. They're foiling us for the data for their competitors, because that's what data is there for. It helps us make better markets. So that's another big initiative for the year. And finally, accessibility, something that we started in the green and yellow taxi world. We need to address the imbalance that's currently in the black car sector in particular. The livery sector is where most of our green taxis are, and they have an accessibility mandate. So there is some more provision for services of that nature in the livery world. But in the black car market, there's virtually none. There's probably a handful of vehicles. As more passengers use that sector, it becomes more popular, and there's more of a demand for actual access to the cars. So I don't foresee that being an easy road to travel this year, but we will travel it as we've done before. So those are some of the highlights, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Okay, thank you very much. And the first question will go to Sue Young.
So like you mentioned, you've been doing a lot of the studies and data. Oh, sorry. So actually, I was going to ask you about this study too, because like a city, I remember last year, the de Blasio or TLC mentioned that they're going to start studying about the Uber, not only yellow cab and green cab, but Uber, GAD or something like the car sharing service industry. So you said you started that last year, right?
What we started last year was gathering data, trip data, for all of those companies, and previously nobody had gathered that on a consistent and automatic basis. The city independently embarked on a study using McKinsey as consultants, looking at traffic data to determine whether there's a congestion effect on the amount of cars that are being added into sort of the TLC regulatory world every day.
And I just want to make sure if TLC is in charge of those car sharing service companies too? Or?
Carpooling, yeah, so you see things like Uber Pool, Lyft Line, Via, that TLC does, we regulate all of those cars. The only rule that we have is that the passengers have to consent to share a car.
Oh, how come only pool service then? Not if just only one single passenger
We do
uses
both.
that?
Yeah, we regulate all of the anytime you pay a driver to take you to point A to point B, we regulate that driver. If the passengers agree that they'd like to share the ride and split the costs, we're okay with that too, as long as they've all agreed to do that.
Okay. So I will just jump into the question I've been always wondering. So when I was told to be a panel today, and then I asked around my friends and drivers, what questions you might have to commissioner. And then everyone says okay, so how are yellow cabs and green cab are gonna compete with these new car sharing services? I mean, in last year, the data I collected, there were 26,000 Ubers versus 13,000 yellow cabs. So that means Uber already exists a number of yellow cab, and then more passengers are using those new car sharing services. So I think yellow cabs are drivers, they're kind of struggling. So I mean, I'm wondering what do you think of that, or like, and what TLC can help the industry better?
So it's competition, and we don't really look at how well a sector is doing by the number of cars they have. We look at it sort of by the number of trips they do, and the number of trips that a yellow taxi did per day has definitely come down significantly from its all-time high of like 500,000 in 2012 to 400,000 in 2015 for the year. But that's still 400,000 trips, so that's nothing to sneeze at. So there's a significant core base of passengers, but it is definitely lower than it was before. And what else does competition do? Competition, it creates a place where those cabs, and the drivers, the owners, everybody sort of has to sort of up their game so that they are as attractive as the other options that are out there. But one thing that we as a regulator have to be mindful of, we have a lot of restrictions on the yellow cabs, and we have probably less restrictions on some of the black cars. And as the passengers are moving over to those sectors, some of the restrictions that protect passengers and professionalize the industry a little bit more, we've had to transfer over to the black car sector. And likewise, some of our regulations on yellow taxis, like we had a double shifting requirement. You'd get penalized if your car wasn't on the road 24 hours a day. We've relaxed that requirement because we think the market can take care of that.
Oh, what about the price aspect? Because Uber and Lyft recently slashes their price, I think only for competition. And then is there anything yellow cabs or green cabs are considering to be more competitive in this industry?
Yeah, the price is a complicated issue. We set the price through a public process, so anybody could theoretically come in and testify at one of our hearings about whether cab fares should go up or down. So they are a product of democracy, if this, and they can't change unless we change them. But it does provide the driver with some certainty about how much they will earn in a day because the price is what it is. So when the price wars started, we got a lot of drivers coming in saying, you've got to stop them because we have no say in this, and now we're not able to make the same amount of money we were just making last week for the same amount of work. And so there was some question of whether we should be regulating price in those sectors too. And to tell the truth, we haven't come to a decision. I mean, we'd really need to look at it more. But the difference is where price flexibility works both ways. So if they're going to slash the prices but still have the ability to surge at times, there may be some compensation. From a customer's perspective, I think there is some value to the certainty of the metered fare. So you know that no matter when you get into a cab, the price is always going to be the same, whereas the passengers that may be a little more risky, they're like, oh, I'm willing to gamble, I still want to get there, and I don't care if it costs more, so the surge pricing doesn't bother them as much.
Maybe just one following question. I believe that the yellow cab launched application, like Uber application thing last summer. I think I saw the article. Is it still?
Yeah, there's two. There's any company can come to New York and launch an app to work in the yellow taxis. They just have to meet our licensing requirements. So today we have two of them that are, actually three. Uber offers a yellow taxi option and a green taxi option. Way to Ride is a yellow taxi and green taxi option, and Arrow is another one. Flywheel, I don't know, they've got some rooftops around there. They're looking to start operating soon. And we've got a few other companies. I think, like I said before, hundreds of thousands of trips a day are still a market. So there's still much interest across the country and internationally in coming to New York City and making the yellow brand, I think, a little more up to date.
What is your level of intervention there? I mean, what are you screening for when some developer comes and says, I have an app to try and connect with the green and yellow taxi business?
Security, so we have some PCI compliance, which is basically credit card compliance, that they meet those requirements in terms of payment. Security, there's some safety components. The app has to be able to operate with one touch, so the driver isn't fudging with buttons for half an hour to get to where they need to get to. Certain consumer disclosures on the screen. about the driver's license number, the vehicle number, call 311 if you have a problem, and then running fare quote often is one of the requirements as well. So they all have to do with sort of safety, security, and consumer protection. But the actual software and design and that, oh please, that we can't. I wouldn't even want to venture in those waters.
Okay, very good. Abu.
Okay, Commissioner Meera Joshi, thank you so much for coming. And my name is Abu Tahir. I'm from Bangla Patrika. It's a newspaper for Bangladeshi community. And in New York City, taxi cab industry, about 25% drivers who represent Bangladeshi community.
Yes.
So, hello, did you hear me? Okay. So my question is, there is a lot of anxiety going on in yellow cab industry, as she mentioned, because of Uber, yellow cab, green cab, and I think you know there's about 40,000 families. They are absolutely depend on the yellow cab industry. They are this family. They are feeling like insecure in terms of the financial future. Do you have any prediction the way the other service is coming? And the yellow industry is facing the problem. What would be the face, which is kind of beauty of New York City, the yellow cab, after say about 10 years? What will be the face of New York City? How we will see New York City in terms of the taxi?
So as a regulator, my ultimate dream goal is to make sure there's lots of different competition, so there's choice. So I'd like to see yellow taxis, green taxis, as well as lots of different apps functioning. How you get there, I think, is the real question. And part of it, I think, has to do with how the medallion market is structured now. And there's been a lot of restriction in that market because of the way the price of the medallion went up. And there's lots of people, individual families, that purchase medallions at very high prices. Normally, people make an investment looking at the revenue that you get in. A lot of times, these investments were made without looking at the amount of revenue that was brought in, and much like we saw in the housing market, the two don't match. So I think the way forward takes a little bit of a dip or a lot of a dip first, and that is sort of right-sizing the price of the medallion so that the investments make sense. And that brings new people into the market, and it brings with them new ideas and new technology. So I don't think we've actually seen that happen in the market yet, because there's very few transactions. People are really sort of seeing if they can hold on to a price structure that is not viable today. And the lenders, and especially the regulators for those lenders, are aware of that, and they're not giving banks permission to make those loans in the way that they used to. So my dream future is that there's still choice. The pathway there is to really sort of unpack this medallion market, make it more transparent, and make it somewhere that investors can come into easily and make smart investments into New York City, because it is a brand, as I've said before, that it's hard, everybody all over the world knows it, so you couldn't actually get that kind of marketing even if you paid for it.
Are you seeing sales of green medallions slow down? When is the next sales? What is the market value of the medallions? New York City sold about 6,000 permit for green cab year 2014, and the city planned on adding another 6,000 every year for 3 years. So what is the update?
I'm glad you asked that question today, because we were kind of reviewing this internally, and today's the first day that we've opened up again for the non-wheelchair accessible green taxis, which is a much more desirable commodity than the wheelchair accessible ones. So we'll see those sales start picking up again. We've sold probably about 2,000 of the second, but we're not on a specific timeline. One thing that happens that's kind of interesting, that as a function of the state law, in August, there are no requirements on who can purchase a green taxi. Today, the only people that can purchase them are for-hire drivers and for-hire vehicle owners. So you've already had to be licensed by us for a year. In August, it's opened up to the general public. So I'm interested to see what kind of purchasers are lined up to buy them once the world of who can buy them is a lot bigger.
Okay.
Are you selling them at a flat price, or is this an auction?
It's a flat price. It's a price that was set by state law. It's $3,000 this year. It was $1,500 last year, and the third tranche is, I think, $4,000.
How do you regulate working hours and condition of the green and yellow taxi drivers? Do you do the same for limo drivers? If so, what is their limits? There are health applications for drivers who won't get bathrooms, breaks. Will TLC provide facility for the drivers?
This is always a big subject because, you know, the truth is, it doesn't matter if you're driving yellow, green, livery, black car, you're driving all day, you need to find bathrooms that are convenient and clean. And there is sort of an aspirational hope that through working with the DOT, who actually has some potential to contract for public bathrooms, we could be in a place one day where we're able to put more public bathrooms, especially in places where drivers need them. Until then, we work with TOT to make sure there's more rest stops available for drivers, and there are some restaurants that people frequent, and those facilities become vital to making sure our rest stops are near them.
Do you have any statistic? What kind of health problem facing by the drivers?
Yeah, so we know lots of back problems, lots of prostate. There's lots of, driving a lot, not having bathrooms, and sitting are tremendous strains on the body. One of the features of the Taxi of Tomorrow is that it has a seat that's designed for long time driving. It has lumbar support. So that's been something that I think drivers have truly appreciated, but that's 1,000 vehicles. There's a lot more vehicles on the road. There is some effort, I think, in council to do sort of driver welfare bill. This was done in the past. Back in 2012, we passed rules where we would take 6 cents out of every trip and we'd pass it on to drivers to cover certain health benefits, and that was shot down by a court as being beyond our statutory abilities. So now City Council is looking at giving us more statutory ability.
On the issue of fatigue and the working hours, what's the sort of basis for that? Is that considered a safety regulation?
Yeah, it's always been a safety regulation because, in a lot of like trucking industries, pilot, they have an absolute limit on you can't work, say, 10 hours and you've got to have an 8-hour break between. And some of the safety literature equates drowsiness is the same as being under the influence. And when you think of it in those terms, all of a sudden it becomes really obvious that there's got to be some kind of boundaries. Very hard to enforce. I mean, drivers are not our employees, and we can't possibly be the eyes and ears on the ground for 150,000. So a lot of that is not just the rule, it's getting information out so people understand the dangers of driving extended hours, and they make that choice on their own.
Well, I was going to say, is it a real regulation or is it a suggestion? Because I read that nobody's ever been fined for going over 12 hours.
The old rule was a regulation that was never enforced. What we're looking to do is a rule that we could enforce through data runs, so we wouldn't catch it in the moment, but we could do audits and find people in a look back, and presumably that would work as a deterrent. But that has to be coupled with outreach, because even that doesn't get to every driver. There's always different permutations of how you want to structure your day, but making people understand the necessity of taking a break and the dangers of driving fatigued are probably the best way we can effectuate change. But we'll do the rules too.
And that's one that's equivalent between for-hire vehicles and
yes, it would apply for everybody. The current rule only applies for taxi drivers, and today we have way more livery and black car drivers than we do taxi.
I kind of want to talk about dollar vans. I believe TLC is regulating on those cars too, right?
Yes, commuter vans, yeah. $2 vans, actually, and some are $5.
So, and then before asking this question, I want to confirm this fact. Is that true? The dollar vans are only allowed to pick up passengers who have called for a ride in advance? Is that?
Technically, yes. Realistically, never, right?
Yes, so like I never heard like anyone
Yes.
who like
Called
calls
ahead
called,
for,
you
yeah,
know, the
they
dollar
work by
vans like I'm
prearrangement.
gonna,
Yeah, the dollar van is sort of it's an organic industry that's grown up out of truly a lack of bus services along big corridors. So they do tend to stop, you know, similar or near or on bus stops, and people know they're going to be there, and maybe that's prearrangement in some, you know,
yeah, so like
existential way, but they wait there. They really do think the van will come, and it comes.
yeah, so like you said, realistically, it's kind of not efficient, right? So then, if
Yeah.
this regulation doesn't really work or it's not complied with anyone, and do you consider changing or modify this regulation?
I think our concerns with, and you're right, there's sometimes you find those places where the law certainly doesn't mirror real life, and it doesn't make sense to change real life to mirror the law anymore because the law is not representative of a need. But what our real concerns are in the dollar van world are the number of illegal operators, because there are quite a number of them, and their tendency to have vehicles that are not insured, balding tires, bad brakes, and the fact that they carry a lot of passengers make them a tremendous safety risk. So one of our biggest concerns is enforcement, and we work with the police department because enforcing against those vehicles are often more dangerous endeavors because there's groups of people on them. That's the number one concern. And the number two is attracting a good number of licensed drivers and people that are willing to become licensed. And that means making sure it's not really hard to be licensed. So we're looking at rules and talking to council about whether there's some administrative hurdles that make it more difficult for people to open up legal commuter van businesses than we really need. And the net effect of that is we're promoting an illegal business.
So actually, that was my second question. Like, I heard that there are a lot of like, not a lot, but there are some illegal
You
operators.
can say a lot.
At dollar vans. And do you have any like specific plan and cracking down on them, like
Yeah.
checkpoints?
So we do. We work with NYPD, and up until September, we could seize those vans, and that was somewhat of a deterrent. It was a district court judge ruled that seizure, which is part of local law, it's in the administrative code, was actually violates the Constitution. So we're in court battling that. But while that battle's going on, we can't seize the vehicles anymore. There's another section of the law that allows repeat offenders who've been summoned several times for operating illegal, that allows us to forfeit those. So that's stronger than seizure. You're not going to get that car back ever. We sell it, and the proceeds go probably to the city. I'd have to check on that. So that's what our next tool is, as well as working with the DMV, because there are measures that we can take working in conjunction with the DMV to make sure that the driver's actual state driver's license is suspended or revoked, or their actual vehicle registration is suspended or revoked. And those, for people who don't care about TLC regulations, are stronger, deterrent than me issuing TLC issuing a summons that they'll ignore anyway.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Commissioner, when a driver take a cab, then they have to make about $160 for the cost of the shift, right? So they get disparate when they're in the city. And I think you are the witness, and we are the witness as well. In the city, we'll see the cab is driving like this, and all of a sudden they are stopping and causing the traffic problem and as well as the accident. But I spoke to, there's a lot of taxi drivers, and they told us that, listen, the problem is, first of all, if someone raise the hand, we have to stop by the law,
That's true.
right? And then if we stop in a place where not standing any times, then police is giving the ticket,
That's true too.
right? And then also the desperation of our money. So we don't know where we have to go. So do you have any plan to have kind of taxi stand in every corner that, okay, this is the designated area you can stop. Otherwise you cannot run around from here to here, here to here.
So as I mentioned before, we work with DOT, and we were able to put up several taxi stands and rest areas last year, and we'll continue to do that. It's always a fight for street space in New York. Your point about the lease, we started a pilot which will allow medallion owners and garages to not use the $100 cap or not charge the $100, but instead charge a commission, so that as the driver's day goes, so does the medallion owners. And that seems to me, I haven't convinced many medallion owners yet, but I will still try. It seems to me to be the most equitable way and the least stressful for the driver, but also it incentivizes the driver to, perform well, because he or she can split the profits, right? So everybody makes out. So my hope is that that does catch on, because I think that that would be a better way to lease out taxis. But we've also noticed that many of the garages have brought their rates down considerably because of competition. Your point to the police is correct, and we have met with the police several times last year and continue to do it. There is some sort of old habits die hard, and it's really easy to ticket yellow taxis because they're there and they're easy to spot, even if several other cars are doing the same thing. So we've met with the Chief of Traffic, Chief Chan, several times to sort of bring home the message that we understand ticketing is necessary, but it should be equitable across. It can't just be yellow taxis because they're so easy to spot.
Yeah, because if they get one ticket, then the whole day
The whole day is shot. Yeah.
And what about the?
I don't want to belabor this point because it's not like a really wonderful point, but they have a different point system than anybody else. So if you and I get points on our license, we get suspended after a certain amount or revoked. But a TLC licensee, whether they're driving a black car or a taxi, has an accelerated schedule. And they'll get points a lot faster, and they'll lose their TLC license very quickly if they get 6 or 10 points for the same thing that would be only like 1 point for you and I.
And who will pay the driver for new accessible taxis? I mean, the wheelchair accessible vehicle you are introducing. So who's
So
gonna
the
pay
yellow taxis, the vehicle owner gets $14,000 towards the cost of the car and about $4,000 a year for maintenance, because there's additional maintenance. The driver gets, about 50 cents a trip, and we just sent out a batch of driver compensation checks. Well, they're not actually checks, they're debit cards, and it worked out to, I think, about $100 a week or 2 weeks. I'll get back to you on that one. And additionally, we have an accessible dispatch program where the driver gets the deadhead cost of picking up a passenger in a wheelchair, and that can range from anywhere between $10 to $30 added on to each trip.
How big or how many trips are made using those services?
Using the accessible dispatch, it's about 200 a day. So I think that there is some disconnect between the number of vehicles we have and the demand, but the issue isn't so much that we're meeting a demand, it's that we're providing the opportunity so that at any moment anyone in a wheelchair would be able to get into a taxi. And so I think sometimes, especially in the industry, people are frustrated by that disconnect, but with so many other things that are civil rights, that the matching the exact number to the need is not the fundamental question.
Okay. I have some questions here from some of the folks here in the room, and this one sort of stands in for several. A lot of people have this question. Many livery car service drivers complain about entrapment by TLC undercover agents, especially drivers from minority communities who speak limited English and cannot explain themselves well. They also complain about unnecessary force used by those agents. How regularly does TLC use entrapment to detect violations? Well, that's a sort of a loaded question. I guess the general idea is, are there any set rules, and in what situation can agents use physical force?
So this is not a complaint that I don't hear. I do hear it. And when I started as chair, I heard it a lot, and it was a big concern of mine. So I went over the training that our inspectors get, and I found that the training that they were getting on undercover operations was not adequate. in the sense that, one, it didn't go over what is entrapment, because obviously they can't entrap. That should not withstand a court. That's not allowed. And inspectors need to understand what entrapment is so that they don't do it. Additionally, they needed to understand that there is no sort of dire need to make sure that every time you stop someone, it ends up in a summons. Sometimes you stop someone and there's not enough information to figure out what's going on, and you let that person go. And that does happen a lot of times where there's language barriers. Now, we have some translation services in the field, but they're not always perfect and they're not always used. So I do know that there are occasions, and we have an internal affairs section, which I encourage people to report whenever they feel they've been entrapped or they feel that they've been abused by our inspectors. Please report it to us, because we do an investigation on every single one of those inspectors. And I hope that over time, the training and reinforcing of how to be courteous and professional in the field pays off. So it is something that we're constantly aware of, constantly working on. We have a new batch of inspectors that'll start in the summer, and this is going to be one of the main training points that we will stress. But please don't be shy.
What most of the time are the undercover agents looking for?
They're doing illegal street hail operations, so they're dressed as civilians and they're hailing a taxi, or they're putting their hand in the air and somebody pulls over and they say, "Can I go to the airport?" The guy says, "Yeah, how much will it be?" "It'll be X amount." And at that point, they've established that there was illegal for-hire service offered. And I've given away my secrets on how to, but you could have probably guessed them.
A follow-up on the dollar van question. Are there any legal dollar vans? Any
Yes.
data on how many are legal versus illegal?
Yeah, the illegal number I don't have. Legal is about 500 legal. But illegal, I've heard people in the industry tell me they think it's about the same number illegal. I would hope that it's less than that, but it's very hard to keep data on the illegal world. We have a hard enough time on the legal world keeping data.
I mean, when you say legal, you mean in that clunky way that we described before, where people are actually somehow
Yes,
calling for
but
them?
not, so clunky in the way that you get them, but not clunky in the fact that they're licensed, which means the drivers have gone through a criminal background check. They've actually gone through a medical check that's required by the state. The vehicle has the right insurance, which is fundamental, because if you're not carrying for-hire insurance and you're doing for-hire work, it's not going to be covered if there's a crash. So that is a key point. And the vans are inspected by us. So the brakes are tested, the tires are tested, and they will have a license plate that either says TC or LV. And we're working on better distinctive markings for the commuter van. The authorized commuter van community feels left out. So sort of the rest of the for-hire world is, there's apps, they've got colors, and they have nothing. So we worked on a branding for them, which is a decal on the side as a pilot. Everybody liked it. They all sort of joined in. And now we're formalizing that, and we're going to look to see if we make them all the same color. Our concern is that it may be copied, so we've got to figure out what to do to make sure that it's unique and hard to copy. But the idea being that communities that commuter vans serve should have the same kind of legitimacy in terms of for-hire transportation that the green taxis have gotten now, which used to be livery cars, and now they're painted green. So that's another initiative for 2016, and hopefully that will help us also with the illegal problem.
Does the MTA seek or use data on where the dollar vans are active? I mean,
Wish they did. No, they've never, not to my knowledge, have they asked us for data on dollar vans. But I think if you tracked where dollar vans are operating, you'd easily see where there's a need for bus service.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting.
How would Yellow Cab compete with car sharing companies with better price and service? Uber slashes price at 15% of the flat rate on the trip to JFK is 52 plus tools. Lyft recently introduced a flat rate of 35 with Lyft line.
So this industry really is driven by drivers, and though those prices seem attractive to passengers, they're certainly not attractive to drivers because they're making much less on those trips. They're putting in the same miles, they're using the same amount of gas. So one effect of slashing prices is you may lose some drivers. Those drivers go back to yellow, and then sort of the pendulum starts to swing the other way. So I think there will be this constant push and pull to sort of bring in new passengers, but somehow additionally retain drivers.
As you mentioned, you are thinking about the training of the driver and the other when you have your brief statement. What kind of training you are going to have for the driver?
Taxi drivers now have a 24-hour training requirement, so we do the same now for livery and black car drivers. There's a few components to them. Customer service, one component that I think is really important, especially for the black and livery sectors, our rules and how not to get in trouble, which is a training they've never gotten before, and it's really good to sort of give them at the outset what you can do and what you can't. We have a Vision Zero component that we put together with the Department of Transportation, isolating some of the hardest to navigate intersections and most dangerous intersections, letting them know where those are and some of the tools of how to safely navigate them. We go through wheelchair assistance training. If there's, especially in taxi school, there's equipment in the vehicles, we teach them how to use that equipment as well.
And what about there is a lot of drivers that took the ride and then say about a person supposed to pay $50 and then he opened the door and ran away. The driver called the police came, heard the story, and then there is no police report. What do you want to say about it?
What I urge people to do is if things like that happen, please don't be shy. Call us. That's not something that we are pleased to hear, and we're more than happy to reach out to NYPD and convey that. NYPD has now identified what they call their sort of for-hire liaison, an inspector who's just working to help bridge sort of the gap between NYPD and the for-hire driver industry. So they have a point person there now to address complaints just like that. The more that you report, the more that it becomes an issue that an agency can deal with.
If about, because of the unrestness and the competition, if few thousand family become jobless because of the slow business and competition and all this stuff, what is your plan to take care of them?
It's like I said, it's not sunny for a lot of people who've made investments, and I have to stress, been lent a lot of money, and maybe they should not have been lent so much money, and that puts the person who borrowed it in a really bad, quite frankly, situation. Our goal is to make sure that there is service, and the more we can do to promote, to make sure there's enough service out there, that cars are out there, that there will still be opportunity. So everybody will have to adapt and change, and it will be a difficult road, but we're doing some efforts to sort of make it easier to be in the business and stay in the business. For one, we've made our sort of driving sector requirements come together so that a driver gets licensed, they can drive a black car or a taxi. So if the taxi market is where they've been and it's not working, they can go to the black car. If they go to the black car and prices get slashed, they can go back to taxi. And I think that adaptation is going to be key to continued sort of making a livelihood in the industry.
This is, I guess, some basic business. What's the best way to get information from your agency? Who handles media inquiries? And what's the best way to reach that person?
So she's sitting right here in the front row, Rebecca Harshbarger, and Alan Fromberg, who many people may know, was very ill today, so he couldn't be here. I'm lucky to have the best press office in the city. So feel free to take Rebecca's card and call us. We're always available and very quick turnaround.
Okay, so that's the free information. This organization also did a study on the percentage of official advertising done with community media outlets and found that we get nowhere near the level of advertising that our size of specialized audiences deserve. The mayor's office has released a statement promising to do better, How much advertising does your office do, and are you committed to making sure an adequate percentage is devoted to community media?
So it's funny, this is another topic that actually came up earlier today, and I don't know if it qualifies as advertising, but we are putting together a plan to make sure we have more placements in the ethnic media, because there's information that we need to get out, especially about schools, that are best presented if they're done through the ethnic media. So our plan for 2016 is make sure that we have good contacts and a regular array of newspapers that we can go to for placements. It helps us tremendously in getting our message across.
Okay, these are the folks to do it. This is a question: what is the justification of high fines of $1,500 or $1,000? The commission then has the practice, or I guess the incentive is what's meant, of having drivers plead guilty and pay smaller amounts.
You guys have ESP. So this was the topic of a few days ago. We're in the middle of a penalty review, and this exact issue came up. You get a summons, and it might say you have a daily rate, or it might say you have a fine of $1,000, and it creates a sort of, mind state of, I have no chance, and even if I fight this, if I lose, look how much it's at stake. And then you may be more inclined to settle than go for a hearing, and the settlement will be a lot smaller. So we're contemplating definitely restructuring our summonses, making sure that we described a more realistic picture of what the actual penalty you might be facing is. And actual, I don't mean, yes, under the law, you are entitled to go after that amount of money. Realistically, we don't, but we need to sort of be portraying more of the realistic picture to licensees that receive summonses. So there's going to be some procedural changes that we'll do in our communications and what summonses say in the next couple months, as well as a penalty review to just have an overall look at whether some penalties are just too high. They're not adequate for the type of behavior we're trying to deter.
Are those handled by administrative law judges, or is that just between the driver and one of your staffers?
Our staff has we have a prosecution unit, so we issue our enforcement staff issue the summons, our prosecutors prosecute them, and a separate agency, the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, has a judge that oversees that hearing.
Okay. There are a number of questions that really all go back to the same point, which is, let me try and ask it a slightly different way. I was in a green taxi this week where he's one of these very enterprising guys. He's got a lot of hardware, a lot of, like 3 or 4 different phones. He's taking calls over the radio because he was part of a radio base. He's also responding to Uber, which is how I got him. I hailed through Uber. Do you have any kind of overall sort of philosophy of where all of this is supposed to be going? Is each driver going to be sort of an entrepreneur out for his or herself, affiliated with multiple companies and agencies, or do you see it settling out in the future?
So this question was really posed to us in sort of maybe in the lawsuit arena, I can't remember exactly. In 2014, we had to address it. Are we going to allow drivers to drive for multiple bases or multiple apps? And in looking at it, drivers are independent contractors for the most part. They don't get employee benefits. They don't get guaranteed income. And so in return, they need the flexibility of being able to take income opportunities wherever they can find them. And so we said, yes, they should be able to drive for many bases. And so that's why drivers can pick up Uber, they can pick up Lyft, they can pick up Get, they can pick up a lot of different things. We do have a rule on the number of devices you can have. It's not always easy to enforce, but it's there. On the technology side, where do I see this going? My dream world, I would see one portal where these guys could all get together, so drivers didn't need 6 different devices to look at different apps. And where I see it going in terms of where the drivers end up, I think that there will be a continued state of sort of competition to woo drivers with different benefits. And one company may end up having, I think as is the case today, a better advantage either financially to be able to do that and retaining more drivers than others. But there will always be this push and pull as sort of circumstances change to bring drivers over to do jobs for you, and that's going to be based on having enough business. So I think we'll see some flow and some choice.
And just to be clear, when Uber announces, as they did recently as a promotion, hey, we're going to slash our prices by 15%, to the end user, to the customer. They give all kinds of discounts and rebates. If you use a certain credit card, they'll rebate another 20% back to you, that kind of a thing. The yellow and green taxi drivers don't have that kind of flexibility, right? I mean, it's established by the TLC what they can charge, how much per mile, how much for waiting, and all of that kind of stuff. Is that part of the legal discussion? Has there been a legal challenge to the vast difference between those two pricing structures?
That hasn't been a legal challenge. I've had several drivers groups approach me after the price slashing. On one hand, they'd like us to set a minimum fare so that you can't slash prices below a certain amount, so there's some certainty for them on how much they're going to make. And the actual restriction on taxi drivers, yellow and green, you can't charge over the fare, but you could accept less than the fare. So the driver technically could accept less. It's just an awkward thing to do on a one-off basis. But I have had companies approach me and see if they could sort of lower the fare in taxis as promotions. We do a lot of work in establishing the fare to make sure that it's a number that works for drivers, and it would be difficult, I think, for us to say that a number that we think works for drivers a few years ago actually could come down some. We do have to be cognizant of how much money a driver's making in an hour and how many trips they can make.
I can tell you anecdotally, when they did the price slash, the number of cars available, and I go to get a car every morning at the same time to get my kid to school, just fell drastically. The wait time to get a car went from 4 minutes on average to about 12 minutes, or there would be surge pricing. I mean, I was surprised at how price sensitive it was. That 15% seemed to make the difference to enough people that the cars were just less available.
Many drivers felt that it was sort of one after the other. So in 2014, there was especially drivers who'd signed up 2 years ago. They signed up 2 years ago when prices were well above taxis. Then in 2014, was it the end of my years are getting all mixed up, but I believe it was the end of 2014, the prices came to the same as taxi, and now they're below taxi. So they feel like this is the second time prices have come down. And for those who made investments in large luxury vehicles, that does become untenable.
Mm-hmm. And I gather from what you said before, TLC, you are not involved in any of those financing arrangements, either for the for-hire drivers or for the medallion drivers.
No, we do for medallion drivers. We put limits on how much an agent can charge for a vehicle. We haven't ventured into that water on the other side. We haven't sort of felt the need to yet. I don't know if we never will, but we did on the yellow side find that there came a time when, although we were setting a lease cap, the owners were making all the money on financing the vehicle, and we did need to step in. And now that if that's what comes out of this, then I think that we do have the charter authority to look at it in other sectors.
I've only heard it anecdotally, but right, the reason so many people are zipping around in these brand new Camrys is that they're being financed by Uber, and then it comes out of their revenue, and then that connected with the price slash is putting people in really quite a squeeze.
Toyota Camry's done really well in the last few years.
Okay.
Commissioner Mira, can you just tell us, how you will maintain the relation with the ethnic media? Because taxi industry, the people who are working, most of them, they are the community people, ethnic minority people. So, and they are absolutely based on their ethnic media. Say about Bangladeshi community, they read all kind of Bengali newspaper. Pakistanis, they read Pakistani newspaper. Indian read Indian newspaper. Some other community. But what I found, the relation between TLC media department and the ethnic different media is not so close. So what would be your initiative to build up the relation?
So I'm glad you posed that question. I hadn't thought about it before, but forums like this make me think that it wouldn't be that difficult for us to do something regularly with a list of ethnic media contacts, where we could have people come in for the day, and we've got a commission room, and people could use it as an opportunity to ask questions, but for us to also provide briefings on updates. And also that face-to-face provides the connection that we may not get, that we have sort of with the other daily reporters that show up to events. And it's not always possible with the ethnic media to have that kind of mobility.
Okay, so even with our slightly late start, this brings us to the end of our hour. So please join me in thanking Mira Zoshi, the TLC Commissioner, for spending some time with us today. Okay, I'm sure some people want to take pictures of you, with you, or toward you. So we'll ask that we do that right outside. We have a nice little area out there that's great for that. And we'll ask folks to stay here for a minute as well while she is doing that, and we'll have a little chat. So,
All right.
thanks a
Thank
lot.
you so much.
Yes,
It
very
was
good to
so
see
much
you.
fun.
Yeah.